transparency here. And without further ado, we're going to get this started because you want to hear from these candidates who want to represent you. So guys, let's start it off. I would like to present to you our first candidate for this presidential forum, candidates forum at the NAACP. Without further ado, Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Thank you.
Senator Warren, thank you so much.
It's so good to be here.
It's great to visit with you, yes. We're going to have a conversation.
I am so glad to hear that.
So, you have an opening statement, 2 minutes.
So let me just start out by saying thank you for having me here. It is such an honor to be with the group that has been on the front lines of social, racial, and economic justice forever, and to be here at a time of historic importance for this group because you have just called for the impeachment of Donald Trump. I read the Mueller report the day it came out. I read into the afternoon and into the night and into the next morning. And when I got to the end, I did not stick my finger in the air and ask about the politics. I did not hesitate. I read it, I knew what it said, and I concluded first that this is a man who has broken the law and he should be impeached. And I said so on that very day. I come to you at a moment of great crisis in this country, a crisis at a time when America's working better and better and better and better for a thinner and thinner slice at the top, while it leaves everyone else behind. The central question of my life's work has been, what's happening to working families in America? Why is the road getting so much rockier and so much steeper? And for families of color, even rockier and even steeper. And the answer is it's no accident. Race lies right at the heart of this issue. Look around us. Hate crimes are on the rise. The black-white wealth gap continues to increase. Voting rights are undercut. None of that is an accident. We live in an America where the plan of the President of the United States is to turn people, working people, against working people.
All right.
Let me just finish, I'll take it at the end.
Okay.
Based on color, based on change. Because here's the important part. We have got to make change in this country, not little changes around the edge. Big structural change. That's why I'm in this fight.
All right. So you talked about Washington in your opening statement.
I did.
So what's happening at the moment, Robert Mueller is on the hot seat.
Yep.
He said the president is not exonerated of obstruction of justice.
That's
Your
right.
thoughts?
So read the Mueller report, and it makes three central points. The first one is that a hostile foreign government attacked our 2016 election for the purpose of helping then-candidate Donald Trump. Footnotes documents clearly lays this out. Part 2, then-candidate Donald Trump welcomed that help. And then Part 3, once the federal government started investigating that attack, now President Donald Trump did everything he could to obstruct justice. We have to make clear, no one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. It is time to bring impeachment charges against him.
And that goes to my next question. The NAACP approved a resolution for the articles of impeachment to begin. What say you about that, particularly as Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, is not for impeachment right now?
I understand that there are people who, for political reasons, say it's not where we want to be. But in my view, some things are above politics. And one of them is our constitutional responsibilities to do what is right. And the responsibility of the Congress of the United States of America when a president breaks the law is to bring impeachment charges against that president. My view is, whether it would pass the Senate or not, I've heard this argument, this is a moment in history, and every single person in Congress should be called on to vote and then to live with that vote for the rest of their lives.
Your campaign slogan is, "I have a plan for that."
It didn't start out that way.
Well, okay.
No, but there are just a lot of plans, a lot of things we need to do.
So what is your plan to bridge the economic disparities for Black and Brown America in areas of home ownership and access to capital?
All right. So let me do these. I have a plan. Yeah.
Tell us your plan.
To build about 3.2 million new housing units in this country. The federal government has backed out of doing that. We need to do this. This would be housing for middle-class Americans, for working-class Americans, for the working poor, for the poor, for the homeless, for people with disabilities, for seniors that want to age in place. It would reduce rents overall by about 10%, produce about 1.5 million new jobs that can't be sent over to China or someplace else. But a part of this housing plan looks at why we have so much disparity in this country, and it's because of redlining. At a time, generation after generation, the federal government subsidized housing purchases for white people, while it discriminated against housing purchases for African Americans. And that shows up in intergenerational wealth. So my proposal not only builds new housing units, helps refurbish all of our housing in America and bring down housing costs, but specifically sets money aside to say that in formerly redlined areas or places where people lost their homes during the housing crash that focused on families of color and communities of color, we're going to do first-time buyer assistance and get more African Americans into home ownership. That's how you make a difference. And since you asked about entrepreneurship as well, you know, we have an entrepreneurship gap in America. Right now, whites are about twice as likely to be able to start a successful small business as African Americans. And the principal reason for that, it's not because people don't have good ideas, not because they don't work hard, it's because they don't have capital. They don't have the cash to get started. I'm not talking about loans. You got to be paying back loans from the beginning. They don't have capital, in part traced back to redlining and the problems we've got in creating a black-white wealth gap. So I got a plan for that.
Okay.
It'll take about $7 billion to close that gap. But I propose a fund, and I've got it fully paid for, just like my housing plan, to take $7 billion and make it available for equity for entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs who are getting started, entrepreneurs who want to build their businesses. These are the upfront investments that often make the big difference between whether a business can succeed or fail. One other part, this $7 billion fund is going to be administered by people of color, by women, by people who are usually shut out of the investment decision. We know that people making investment decisions tend to pick people who look just like them. So instead of having a bunch of white guys run this, we're going to make this an investment fund that looks like the people who need a chance to be able to build their own businesses.
That sounds great.
Good.
But at the end of the day, how are you going to pay for it?
Oh, I got paid for on this.
Okay,
Ready?
tell me.
All right.
I'm ready.
Because this is
What's your
so
plan?
fun.
I've got a plan for that.
A wealth tax. It's time for America to put a wealth tax in place. This is a 2-cent tax on the top 1/10 of 1% of fortunes in this country. So your first $50 million, free and clear. But for your, I know you're relaxing now. For your millionth and first dollar, you got to pitch in 2 cents, and 2 cents for every dollar after that. That produces enough money, think about this, to provide universal child care for every baby in this country age 0 to 5, universal pre-K for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old in this country, raise the wages of every child care worker and preschool teacher to the professional levels they deserve.
And we're now in our closing statements.
Provide technical school, community college, and 4-year college for every one of our kids. Put $50 billion into historically black colleges and universities. Cancel student loan debts for 95% of those who've got them. And put $7 billion into my entrepreneurship fund.
I thank you.
Thank you.
Now we have closing remarks. It went by fast, but closing remarks.
We need to make change in this country, not just to get rid of Donald Trump and go back to the way things were. A country that elects a man like Donald Trump has serious problems. And we need to make big structural change. We need to have the courage to attack head-on the problems that infect this country, and we need to make those changes. Here's how I see it. Yeah, I got a lot of plans, but if you want to get something done, you better have a plan for it.
All right.
You good?
And you got a plan for it. And we have 41 seconds left. 40 seconds. Anything else you want to add?
I want you to know this. My daddy ended up as a janitor. I had a dream all my life, and that was to be a public school teacher, but no chance to go to college because my family didn't have the money. My big chance in life was a commuter college that back then cost $50 a semester. I have lived opportunity, and I am committed down to my toes that every child in this country will have opportunity. That's why I'm in this fight for president.
Senator, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you. Thank you so much. First candidate at the forum, Senator Elizabeth Warren. All right. 1 down. 9 more to go. Look who just came out on the stage. Cory Booker, Senator Booker. Hello, Senator Booker. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
Fine. Spartacus is in the building.
Uh-oh. Good morning, everybody.
You now have 2 minutes of an opening statement.
Well, I just want to say how good it is to be back here in Detroit. My family hails from this city. This is where my mama was born, and this in many ways was the start of our American dream. We have an existential crisis in this country, which is the presidency of Donald Trump, ripping our nation apart. We have to make sure that we win this next election. And we know there has been no great movement for social change, political change, or economic change in this country without African American communities being a part of that transformation. And we must have leaders that don't just come to our communities and ask us for their vote, but that know our communities, are engaged in our communities, and partner with our communities. Because if we do not have that, we will not win. I believe this election has to be not just about what we are against, but by what we are for. And we've got to articulate a vision that is inclusive of all of America. Because we know in communities like mine, where I was the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, we know that the challenges we have did not begin with Donald Trump, and beating him is not enough. Beating Donald Trump is a floor, it is not the ceiling. It gets us out of the valley, but it does not get us to the mountaintop. And when it comes to issues of systematic economic disempowerment, when it comes to issues of gun violence or attacks on public education, We must be ready to bring a fight, not just to the election, but to actually getting transformative things done from Washington to our communities. Thank you very much, April.
All right. So as an active senator, I'm going to ask you the same question. Robert Mueller's in Washington.
Yes.
And he said the president is not exonerated of obstruction of justice. So what say you about that?
Well, you read the Mueller report and you see quite clearly that he spells out behaviors, deceit, instructing people to lie and cover things up. That report is enough of an indication that the House of Representatives should begin impeachment proceedings against this president.
Okay.
And I am proud that the NAACP today resolved that we should do just that.
Okay.
But again, this is a Congress right now that's divided. It's a Senate that's controlled by the Republicans. What we ultimately must be prepared to do, should Congress fail, remember the power of the people is greater than the people in power. And we need to be ready to beat Donald Trump soundly in the 2020 elections, and that's why I'm running for president.
All right. So a new DOJ report shows, and I know you know about this report, that Newark, New Jersey has the worst record on police-involved abuses. You were the proud mayor of that city. What would you do as president to fix the issues of Newark and other cities like Newark, if elected president?
Well, we inherited in Newark, New Jersey, a police department with decades-long challenges with accountability, decade-long challenges with transparency. And we ended up working with the ACLU to create national standard-setting accountability measures. Police accountability is critical. We saw this most recently with Eric Garner and what happened with him and the DOJ here on the federal level failing to do what is necessary. You can't have safe, strong communities unless you have an accountable police department that has legitimate connection to our communities. And so police accountability is essential. And so already, this is not about what I'm going to do as President of the United States, already I've introduced legislation to begin to hold police departments around our country accountable, to force them to produce information, including on uses of force and police-involved shootings. And so as President of the United States, I'm going to make sure that we have a plan for broad-based criminal justice reform, because we have gotten to a distraught present. We now have more African Americans under criminal supervision than all the slaves in 1850. We have a system that is deeply biased along racial lines, and that is from policing to incarceration to even the opportunities that come from reentry. This is a system of mass incarceration that I'm determined to tear down. So we have a system in America that isn't like Brian Stevenson says, where he says we have a system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. We will have a system that reflects our values, and I will be the president that brings that finally to be.
So, Senator Booker, you brought up Eric Garner. If you happen to be mayor of New York City, or if Eric Garner were in your district, would you have sought for charges against the officer that fatally choked Eric Garner?
So, April, we live in a country now where we see these things happening on videotape that are clear to our eyes. Eric Garner was selling loose cigarettes, and yet he was suddenly put into a chokehold and killed. So yes, I would have brought charges, but this is what we have to understand. For every video that we see, there are thousands of incidents that we don't. For every name that we know, there are thousands of others that we don't know. The critical key for the next president is to have a Department of Justice, not like this president who is pulling back investigations and consent decrees on police departments. But we need to have a Department of Justice that is actively working to stop the oppression of poor communities, of minority communities, and the uses of force that are unacceptable in a nation with our values.
This is the 400th anniversary of slaves coming to this nation. And you brought up Africa a minute ago. Why does Africa matter to this country?
You know, look, we are a nation that is a part of a larger planet. And so from issues of climate change to issues of dealing with our economic security as a nation, Africa is a continent of extraordinary value, not just in the worth of the people, but in the larger global context. And what you see now is a competition on the planet Earth between authoritarian regimes and free democracies. I was the head in the Senate of the Democrats on the Africa Committee. And I was flying to Africa with a Republican and a bipartisan group to talk to the new leader of Zimbabwe to push him to have free and fair elections. And as we were landing, Mnangagwa, the new leader, was landing from China, where China was saying to him, we don't care about your values. We don't care about free and fair elections. We just want to be able to extract your industry, extract your minerals. This is the kind of competition that's going on. America has a role in the world, and what this president is doing right now is he calls African countries S-hole countries. It demeans and degrades other planets. He's isolating our nation from other nations in the world, including our allies. It is time for the United States to lead again and be a leading force of light, of justice, and democracy, not an isolated nation turning its back on its allies and allowing totalitarian and authoritarian governments to have sway.
And in our last minute of Q&A, some of the top issues of our nation's veterans are mental health, homelessness, access to services, and unemployment. How do you plan to bridge the divide that has crippled the Department of Veterans Affairs?
Look, we see a nation that seems to come up with enough money to send people overseas, often to wars and engagements we shouldn't be in, trillions of dollars of our taxpayer money going there. But when they come home, we plead poverty and not have the resources to provide for them when they come home. I mean, we are literally a nation that sings in our national anthem. It ends with, we are the home of the brave, but yet our veterans are disproportionately homeless. As President of the United States, I will step up to our obligations and understand that we need to have a healthcare system, a VA system, a housing system that works. And especially as our veterans are coming home
7 seconds.
are coming home with invisible challenges. We need to show that we are a nation of courageous empathy, that we are a nation of love, that all of our citizens, from our veterans, from our low-income folks, all of our citizens are there. And so in closing,
there we go.
And I appreciate you doing this.
Thank you, sir.
Look, I am tired of watching presidential elections in the past where folks aren't speaking to the realities of issues of African Americans. And to see issues like housing, economic empowerment, healthcare disparities, even disparities in access to capital, because the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in America are African American women. I will be a president that will beat Donald Trump first and foremost by inspiring a critical element of our coalition, which is African American voters, to turn out. But I will make sure, just like as a United States senator, who when I got to the Senate and saw that there were not African Americans fairly represented on Senate staffs or even on committees like the Judiciary Committee, to make sure that we as African Americans are at the table when decisions are being made about our communities. And even more than that, to make sure that we focus on the critical issues where you see right now unfair disparities in our nation. Disparities in income, disparities in opportunity, disparities in education. We will never be the nation we say we are, of liberty and justice for all, unless we begin to lead as a nation that invests in all of our communities. And I want to say this, finally.
28 seconds.
This is the most important election of our lifetime. And we, in African American communities, will determine the destiny of our nation. We are too critical of a campaign. And so as your candidate, I will make sure that when we come to communities like Detroit, we just don't talk to people, but we invest in those communities. We elevate leadership from these communities and make sure that ultimately the victory is shared by every community in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you so much. Candidate Cory Booker. Candidate Cory Booker. 2 down and 8 more to go. Are you getting needed information that you're not hearing in other places? All right. And now, candidate number 3, Beto O'Rourke.
Hi.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Welcome. You're very tall. Come.
Mind if I address the crowd?
Oh, you can address the crowd standing, but you have 2 minutes to do it, and then we
got
go to
it.
7 minutes and seconds. Yes.
Good morning. Buenos dias. On this very day, July 24th, 95 years ago, in my hometown of El Paso, Texas. There you go. Dr. Lawrence Nixon walked into fire station number 5, his polling location, showed up with his poll tax receipt and attempted to vote, and was turned away because of the color of his skin. The year before, 1923, Texas created the all-white Democratic primary. But Dr. Nixon, who had started the first branch of the NAACP in the state of Texas in El Paso, took his case to the Supreme Court twice. And through his courage and his persistence and his patience, he integrated our democracy, at least took the first step in Texas. And in 1944, almost 20 years to the day, he walked back in to fire station number 5 and proudly cast his ballot. That is owing to the tenacity and the leadership of this organization, and it was the inspiration for our campaign last year in Texas, where we encountered a state that previously had ranked 50th in voter turnout, not because we love our democracy any less than you do here in Michigan, but we were literally drawn that way. Based on your race, your ethnicity, your country of national origin, you were drawn out of a congressional district to diminish the power of your vote or the likelihood that we would hear your voice. But to transcend that, we went to every single one of the 254 counties of Texas, showed up for everybody, and won more votes than any Democrat had in the history of the state of Texas. That is how we are running this campaign today. That is how we will defeat Donald Trump, writing nobody off, bringing everyone in, taking no one for granted. And that is how, in January of 2021, we will bring this great divided country back together again.
Time for questions.
Thank you all for having us out.
Let's have a
Gracias.
seat. Let's visit. Yes. Yes, let's visit. Okay. Do you favor full restoration of the Voting Rights Act, especially Section 5 requiring pre-clearance of election changes?
Yes.
Explain.
If we had that, Stacey Abrams would be the governor of the state of Georgia right now. We would not have racist voter ID laws in my home state of Texas. In addition to that racial gerrymandering, right now in Texas, you can use your license to carry a firearm to prove who you are at the ballot box, but you cannot use your student ID at Texas Southern University to prove who you are at the ballot box. A new Voting Rights Act removes those barriers, and then we're going to follow the lead of Secretary of State Benson and the state of Michigan. Same-day voter registration, automatic voter registration, ending gerrymandering, and no more political action committees or corporations contributing to federal candidates or office holders. We're going to get our democracy back for everyone.
What is your plan to reduce the cost of prescription drugs, as Pharma says the price is built in due to, in part, lengthy research?
We're going to sign into law Medicare for America, which means that if you don't have insurance today, you're automatically enrolled in Medicare. If you're insufficiently insured, we'll enroll you as well. If you have employer-sponsored insurance and you like it, you can keep it. It will allow us to make prescription drugs affordable for everyone. And we'll also use the purchasing power as leverage for Medicare to bring down, negotiate down the price of prescription drugs. In addition, we'll allow you to go right over the border here in Canada and buy from Canada, the European Union, Japan, other countries selling medications at a far lower price with the same high level of quality. So allowing you to buy overseas, allowing Medicare to negotiate down the price, and guaranteeing universal high-quality care for every American, that makes medication and health care affordable for all.
So how will you safeguard if you buy drugs from another country that don't necessarily have the same regulations and guidelines that are here?
We will ensure, and that's why I use Canada and the European Union as examples. We will ensure that they meet the same strict standards that we have here in the United States. The problem is, you and I, as taxpayers in this country, invested in the drugs that are being sold back to us at the highest prices on the face of the planet today, the research and development, the clinical trials, the fact that we purchase them for Medicare and Medicaid, TRICARE and VA beneficiaries. Let's use that leverage to bring down the cost, and then in addition, let's allow some competition from these other countries as long as we're satisfied that they're maintaining that same or a better level of quality.
What is your agenda for the LGBT community?
I want to make sure that we allow every single American to live to their full potential. That means in a state like mine in Texas, where you can be fired based on your sexual orientation, where you can be denied the ability to adopt a child out of a foster care system that has 30,000 children today because of your sexual orientation, that we sign into law the Equality Act that guarantees the full civil rights of every single American. We overturn the transgender troop ban. We follow the lead of people like Janice Poindexter, whom I met here in Detroit, who told me about the fact that you have so many trans women of color who are being killed in this country without the necessary follow-up or pursuit of justice, the resources necessary for those police departments and the DAs to stop this epidemic of crime against trans women of color. We want to make sure that everyone is safe in their own communities and everyone is free to live up to their full potential.
What is your plan to eradicate or lower student loan debt?
Let's do this. Let's stop digging the hole in the first place. Ensure that the first 2 years of higher education are absolutely free for every American.
How do you pay for that?
I'll tell you, but I want to give you one more idea on this.
Okay.
Second, let's make sure that for a 4-year degree, it is debt-free for lower income and middle income Americans. And those who are holding outstanding student loan debt right now, we are going to radically restructure the public service debt forgiveness program. If you're willing to serve as a public school educator, we will wipe clean your debt so you can focus on those children in front of you in the classroom. And we'll pay for it by making sure that everyone pays their fair share in this country. Take a corporate tax rate that was dropped from 35 to 21%, back up to 28%. It generates hundreds of billions of dollars over the next decade, more than enough resources to invest in the future and the careers of our fellow Americans, and also to ensure that for those who do not pursue higher education, that we elevate the roles of unions and allow people to enter apprenticeships debt-free, learning a skill or a trade that will allow you to command a living wage for the rest of your life.
Wow. I want you to finish this sentence. The biggest misconception about me is?
Perhaps the biggest misconception about me, given where we are in the polls today, is that our chances have narrowed and diminished in this race. But I want to tell you, when I first ran for Congress in 2012, we also ran against the incumbent and we ran against the odds. No one gave us a snowball's chance in Houston of being successful in that race. But believing in the people of our community and these great supporters and volunteers, friends and family, we knocked on thousands of doors, listened to our fellow El Pasoans, and won that race. And then in Congress, delivered for our constituents, though we were in the minority every single day of the 6 years that we were there. In Texas, taking on Ted Cruz, and not only winning more votes than any Democrat before us, but winning independents for the first time in decades, winning 500,000 Republicans, and electing 2 new members of Congress, helping to flip the House of Representatives, and 17 African-American women to judicial positions in Harris County, changing the face of criminal justice in that community. So we have been a long shot before, counted down before, but through our persistence and our courage, I know that we can come through for the American people and serve this great country.
Now you're closing.
One last thought on El Paso. And you'll forgive my pride in my hometown, but there's a lot to be proud of. And I'll tell you another person who inspires me. Thelma White in 1954, graduated from the all-black Douglas High School, attempted to enroll in Texas Western College, and again, because of the color of her skin, was turned away. She enlisted the aid of the NAACP in Texas, a little-known attorney named Thurgood Marshall, and they took that case to the federal bench of R.E. Thomason, and not only did her persistence and courage and the decision in that federal court allow her to attend Texas Western College, it integrated higher education throughout the state of Texas, and it struck down the segregation clause in our state constitution. That is why we are going to make sure, as the inheritors of her sacrifice and her service and her struggle, that we invest in true equality, in equity, in education for every single American. We are going to start a $500 billion permanent education fund for equity and excellence. We are going to make sure that we address the disparity in public education funding for communities of color, $23 billion a year. We're going to make sure that we invest in minority-serving institutions, historically black colleges and universities, to train the next generation of teachers, because while funding is important, it's also just as important that the teachers in that classroom look like the students in front of them. We're going to make sure that we live up to the full potential and promise of this country. It is an honor to run to serve you, and I ask for your help and your support in the great mission ahead. Thank you so much for having us out here today. Les agradezco. Gracias. Thank you very much.
Candidate number 3, Beto O'Rourke. Thank you so much, sir.
Gracias.
Thank you so much. De nada. Gracias. I can do that too. Are you gaining the needed information from these candidates? It's important. And now, they call him Mayor Pete, but Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Welcome. Candidate number 4. Mayor Pete Buttigieg, thank you so much. Your opening remarks. Thank you. Your opening remarks, sir.
Great. I'll be brief. My name is Pete Buttigieg. I'm the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. I'm running for president, and I am thankful for the opportunity to be here. I'm thankful to President Johnson and to the NAACP leadership for everything that you do to make our country a more just place. I also want to recognize Apostle Michael Patton, president of our own South Bend chapter, where I am a subscribing Silver Life member. I've been reminded that there are some other levels, so I'm going to do my best for the NAACP because the mission is so important. I'm running for president because I think America is running out of time. I am worried that even now we may be underreacting to the situation that we're in. And it is not just the racism and the corruption that is emanating from this White House. It is the conditions that made a White House like this possible. You don't even get a president like this. A president like this doesn't even come within cheating distance of the Oval Office if everything's going along okay in our country. And that is why we will not and cannot win if our message as a Democratic Party is that we're just going to go back to normal. My generation experienced why normal doesn't work, being on the business end of climate change, being on the business end of an economy where we may be the first generation in American history to do worse than our parents if nothing changes. But I don't need to tell black Americans about why the old normal isn't going to work. It is the crisis of our time. White supremacy brought this nation to its knees once. I believe that systemic racism is the thing that could unravel the American project if we do not confront it. It is why I've proposed that with as much ambition as went into the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe after World War II,
Time for Q&A.
we undertake a Douglas Plan. Is that already out of time?
Yeah, you're already
All right, we'll get to talk about it in the Q&A. Thank you for having me.
Mayor Pete, if you will. Police-involved abuses in South Bend have been an albatross around your neck recently. Please tell us how you would, as president, fix this and other police abuses that arise in this nation.
Well, let me tell you about share the journey that South Bend has been on. When I took office, we had no recognizable promotion or accountability system for promotions in the department. We couldn't even find and publish numbers on cases involving use of force, so we started doing that. We elevated accountability. I saw to it that the board that makes decisions about hiring and firing officers in our city had minority representation and elevated the level of accountability. And we undertook a number of measures so that there was greater police accountability and better relations. We are still on that journey, and it is not done. As president, I am determined to have a Department of Justice that supports cities doing the right thing and compels police departments to do the right thing, because as long as there is a wall of mistrust between communities of color and police departments, everyone is worse off. And I'll tell you, under President Obama, we had resources in the Department of Justice, things like a collaborative reform service process that would help us undertake these reforms. Needless to say, the Department of Justice in this administration has not shown a lot of interest in supporting cities trying to move the ball forward when it comes to police accountability, police use of force, and eliminating racial discrimination from the justice system.
Your top-tier staff does not reflect the diversity of America. If elected president, how would you construct the racial makeup of your cabinet and staff?
So I would point to, first of all, the diversity of the administration that we have built in South Bend. By appointing people who reflect our community, we've not only had better representation, but we've made better decisions. And that feeds upon itself. I'll give you an example. I appointed the first African-American female corporation counsel in the history of the city. And she went on to build a department of law for us, for the city, that was one of the most diverse and excellent in our administration. So when she moved on to become the first African-American magistrate judge in our county, she had a successor from within the department, also African-American, who has in turn gone on to be the first African-American female head of the Bar Association in our county. We are building a campaign team rapidly as we speak, and we are building a team that will reflect the diversity both of the country and party that we seek to represent and of the administration that I seek to serve, and I consider it extremely important.
So how long is that building going to take?
It's underway right now, and we will publish numbers that will demonstrate the diversity of our team.
Okay. People want to know, what is the balance to raising the minimum wage without raising the cost of products?
The reality is, every time they have told us that raising the minimum wage would be consumed by inflation, and it's just not true. We are better off when there is a higher minimum wage. And you know, the House of Representatives last week passed a $15 minimum wage. And because we were talking about the president's racist attacks on 4 congresswomen, I fear that not enough attention went to what those congresswomen were working on, including the minimum wage increase. We got to be able to do both. We got to be able to name and confront racist behavior by this president and have a spotlight on our agenda that is making people better off, especially something like the minimum wage that disproportionately benefits Americans of color but makes the whole country better off. And we've got to make sure that there is a political penalty when Senate Republicans block this measure from being considered when it goes from the House to the Senate.
What is your plan to eradicate or lower student loan debt?
So this one's personal for us. We got 6-figure student loan debt. I married a teacher, and I'm glad I did, but we're living with a lot of debt. It's why we need to expand opportunities, first of all, to make it more affordable on the front end, expanding Pell Grants, pressing states to make college more affordable, and we can deliver debt-free college for low and middle-income students. We can also, on the back end, have a more generous public service loan forgiveness program. And when it comes to these for-profit colleges, which, by the way, target veterans and people of color, they have basically turned the Department of Education into a predatory lender. And so when we're looking at eradicating debt, we should begin with the debt run up by the colleges that did not deliver for their students. Last thing I want to mention is that as important as it is to make college more affordable, we have to make it more affordable to not go to college in this country. And that is one of the reasons why the work that's being done on the minimum wage is so important. Because you should be able to afford to live well as a working American, whether you have a college degree or not.
And in the time remaining, what is your Black agenda?
So, if you want the 45-minute version, I would urge you to go to PeakForAmerica.com and read about the Douglas Plan. But in short, it is this. We have learned the hard way as a country that if you take a racist structure or policy and you replace it with a neutral one, that is not enough to deliver justice and equality because harms compound. In the same way that a dollar saved compounds through the years because of interest, the same thing is true of a dollar stolen. And if we want to truly make America whole, make America equal, then we need to work across every area in which Black Americans and white Americans might as well be living in a different country. In health, that means supporting health equity zones and training and requiring that medical workforces do not discount the pain of a Black female patient, for example, which helps to explain why maternal mortality is higher for Black women. In education, it means massively expanding access to Title I funds and supporting the HBCUs and minority-serving institutions that are training the doctors and the lawyers and the presidents of tomorrow. In home ownership, it means funding a new version, a kind of 21st century community homestead act that would help people stay in their own neighborhoods that are rapidly gentrifying by funding them to acquire properties in neighborhoods that have been historically redlined, because we need to stabilize those neighborhoods. When it comes to criminal justice, we need to cut, and we can do this without crime going up, we need to cut incarceration by 50%. And we're pointing to the clock. I see we're running out of time, but just very quickly, just because a lot of the incarceration is happening at the state level doesn't mean the federal government can't lead on this. By eliminating mandatory minimums, by supporting alternatives to incarceration, by ending incarceration as a response to drug possession, by establishing a clemency commission that does lead the way from the federal side, we can and must do this in our time. Among many other measures we have to undertake so that the criminal justice system is actually serving up justice. These are some of the elements of our Douglas Plan, which I contend is the most comprehensive yet offered by a 2020 candidate to tackle systemic racism and serve Black America.
123 in closing.
All right. So again, there is a lot more detail to these proposals that I hope you will take time to familiarize yourself with by going to PeakForAmerica.com and learning about our message. We are taking this message everywhere, and I also invite you to watch me talk about systemic racism, not only when I am speaking to mostly Black audiences, but when I am speaking to mostly white audiences. As an urban mayor of a diverse city seeking to do the right thing, I have also encountered the limits and the pressures of our lack nationwide of systems and structures that make it possible for everyone to succeed. It took intention to create the kinds of inequalities we're living through right now. It will therefore take intention and resources to reverse those inequalities, and I am determined to do that, because if we do not tackle systemic racism in my lifetime, I am convinced that it will unravel the American project in my lifetime. I am committed to deliver, and I trust that you will see me both in our proposals and in the way we run this campaign live up to that commitment all the way to the nomination and to the White House. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for having me today.
Pete Buttigieg, thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much. Candidate number 4, Pete Buttigieg. All right, as we go to our next candidate, Julián Castro. Candidate number 5. Hello, sir. How are you? Good to see you. Yes, your microphone is on you.
Ah,
2 minutes.
I was asking for a microphone, and the microphone is on me. It shows you we're losing our minds right now. Thank you very much, April, to your president, to the chairman. Good morning. It is wonderful to be with y'all here at the NAACP convention in Detroit. I'm Julián Castro, And I'm running for president because I believe that we need new energy with a new vision for the future of our country. Because I believe that we need a country where everybody counts, where everybody has a place at the table. And over the last 6 months, I've been articulating a vision for the future of our country where we become, in the 21st century, the smartest, the healthiest, the fairest, and the most prosperous nation on earth. And I haven't been afraid to be bold and fearless in the face of a president who is the biggest identity politician to come along in the last 50 years, trying to divide us along racial and ethnic and religious lines. I want for the United States to be a place where no matter the color of your skin or your background, how much money you have or don't have, that you're able to fully realize your dreams. I come from a family with an immigrant grandmother and a mother who was part of the Mexican-American civil rights movement, who was a hellraiser when she was young, that understands that it's not enough for us to just talk about progress. We actually have to work to make it. That's what I did as mayor of San Antonio, to try and transform the east side of the city into one that had more prosperity for the people living there. That's what I did as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, passing the most groundbreaking rule called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, so that we could further desegregate communities across this country. And that's what I'll do if I'm elected President of the United States. And I look forward to a conversation today about that. Thank you very much.
Time for Q&A. Secretary Castro, you were the first candidate in this round of presidential candidates to come out with a black agenda. Why?
Because I think it's important that, especially the black community that too oftentimes has been discriminated against, that has been left behind. I saw this growing up in San Antonio, and I did the same thing as mayor. The first thing I did in San Antonio was that I began working with leaders on the east side of the city to try and make sure that we had opportunity everywhere in San Antonio. So I've chosen to go to Flint. I was the first candidate to go to Flint and to say that we need to put forward resources to eliminate lead as a major public health threat. I was the first, and I think only so far, candidate to put forward a police reform plan, because we saw just a few days ago with the case of Eric Garner that too oftentimes, if you're especially a young black man in this country, that you're treated differently at the hands of police. And my police reform plan would create more accountability and transparency by setting a national use of force standard that says that an officer has to exhaust all other reasonable alternatives before they use lethal force. It would also demilitarize our police, because we've been giving these military weapons to our police equipment, and it's creating over-aggressiveness. I would work with Congress to do away with racial profiling, with stop and frisk, and also my education plan says that we should not have cops in schools that are enforcing discipline, because too oftentimes they're enforcing it in a biased way, especially against young black men. So I'm proud to have an agenda that I believe is resonating with the black community, because it's substantive and it's based on the work that I've done before.
The Trump administration has reduced focus on monitoring and preventing white nationalist domestic terrorism. How would you change that practice if president?
Well, I would go in the other direction. I mean, what we see is that, clearly, look at all of these incidents that are happening out there, right? We've seen the rise of white nationalism and this identity politics of the alt-right that the president is stoking, that he's building his political career on, right? That's what's happening in America today, just to be clear about it. So I would make sure that the Department of Justice is focused on rooting that out and prosecuting individuals who engage in that type of activity, whether it's low-level criminal activity or more serious criminal activity, and taking it seriously throughout the administration.
As president, would you support the passage of the anti-lynching law? Now, modern-day example is that of the dragging death of James Byrd.
Of course I would. Of course I would. We see that too oftentimes, even now in the United States, crimes that should be categorized as hate crimes may not be treated that way. I want to ensure that they are, and that we take all of these crimes as seriously as they should be taken.
The gentrification fight is huge. You have those who profit off of it and those who lose out. How would you balance the dynamic of fixing up communities, fixing infrastructure, building communities back, but also helping the low income and the unfortunate?
I think that you have to do two things. First of all, you know, as HUD Secretary, Housing Secretary, I visited a lot of places, New Orleans, here in Detroit, Flint, a number of other communities, and I actually heard two things. I heard from people, number one, a lot of people who grew up in neighborhoods that sometimes those neighborhoods have been looked down upon, but they say, this is where I'm from. I want to be able to stay in my neighborhood. I want to be a part of, you know, it becoming a neighborhood that has better streets and drainage and better amenities, but I want to be able to stay here. So one part of our policy has to make people be able to stay in those neighborhoods if they want to stay in there. That means programs that are focused on ensuring that the rising costs of rent don't move people out, working with local governments so that they can buffer people against that. The other part of it, though, is for folks that want to move into other neighborhoods that they've been locked out of traditionally. At HUD, we were working through Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing to ensure that people could actually move into those neighborhoods too, because y'all know that too oftentimes people are still blocked based on the color of their skin from being able to live in certain places. We need to fix that too. So the way that I look at that is you need to give people options based on what they want to do. And that's what I would be focused on in my housing program as president.
You just mentioned Flint, Michigan. Flint is not alone. There are many cities across this nation where water is unsafe to drink. How much of a priority would that play in your administration if you became president to fix that problem, not just only just make the levels acceptable, but to fix the problem, to include infrastructure changes?
You know, I've put forward a plan to make sure that lead is no longer a major public health threat that includes money for infrastructure, like the infrastructure issue that we saw in Flint, and especially would target communities that are vulnerable communities that have often been left behind. And the thing is that we need to put resources into it. This is not an issue that local governments or state governments are going to be able to solve on their own. And so my plan does that. It puts billions of dollars into alleviating that issue.
How can the nation pay its bills without raising taxes?
Well, I think that part of the answer is that we're going to have to raise taxes. And we're going to begin by repealing and replacing the Trump tax cuts. I think for the last 40 years, we've been asking more and more of people who are middle class and working poor and less of people that are doing very well and people at the very top. So I would raise the top marginal tax rate. I would close these loopholes that lobbyists over the years of special interests have worked into the tax code. I would look for creative ways to raise revenue. For instance, the National Housing Trust Fund is funded with a transaction fee on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Every time there's a transaction, a little bit of money goes into a fund that's aimed at creating housing for extremely low-income individuals, basically individuals that make less than 30% of the area median income in a community. Those are the kinds of creative ways that I would look at more revenue so that we can do what we need to do to ensure that everybody can prosper in our country.
And now you're closing, sir.
All right. Well, thank you, April. And you know, I know what it's like to grow up and to struggle, to grow up in a single-parent household. I'm a proud product of the public schools of Texas. And I also know what it's like to be able to achieve my dreams, to get to go to college and to law school and be the first in my family to be a professional as an attorney. And that's what I want for every single person in this country, that we're able to make sure that everybody is able to get a good education, that they're able to reach their dreams, that they're able to provide for their family, to pay the rent, to prosper in our nation. And what we're facing now is a president that wants to take us backward. I don't want to make America anything again. I don't want to go backward. I want to go forward. I want to make us better than we've ever been in the future. And that, of course, includes the black community in America that has too often been left behind. I know that. when I was a city councilman, when I was a mayor, when I was HUD secretary. I've worked directly with the black community to try and ensure that everybody can prosper. And I want you to know that if I'm elected president, that I will work in the same way with you to ensure that you and your family can prosper too. Gracias. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Secretary Julián Castro. Candidate number 5. Now we're making way for candidate number 6, Senator Bernie Sanders. Hello, sir. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good to see you. 2 minutes of an opening statement.
I don't have to tell anybody in this room that we are living in an unprecedented moment in American history. We have a president who is a racist, a president who is a pathological liar, and a president who is trying to divide the American people up based on the color of their skin, where they were born, or their religion. Now, Trump may be crazy, he may be a racist, but he is not stupid. He is doing what demagogues have always done, and that is to pick on minorities, to divide people up in order to gain power. The antidote, in my view, to what Trump is doing is exactly the opposite. And what our campaign is about is bringing people together, black and white and Latino, Asian American and Native American, around an agenda that works for all of us, not just the 1%. And when we talk about Medicare for all as a human right, we also talk about the disparities in the healthcare system. We talk about the need for more black doctors and nurses, and end the absurdity of infant mortality rates in the black community 2.5 times the white community. When we talk about wealth and income inequality, we talk about the absurdity of white families owning 10 times more than black families.
And time for questions, sir.
Etc.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sanders, you are not a supporter of reparations for descendants of African slaves. History shows General Sherman promised slaves 40 acres and a mule. Then President Abraham Lincoln supported the military order, yet it is a promise that was not kept. Knowing this, how do you correct this wrong, or do you think you have to?
Well, I support what Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina has talked about, and that is a 10-20-30 legislation, which recognizes that as a result of the legacy of slavery, we have massive levels of poverty, too much unemployment, not enough educational opportunity, and communities that are polluted, and our kids are getting sick. So what we are talking about is putting a massive amount of money into distressed communities, often African American and Latino communities, so that we end the absurdity of the kinds of inequities that currently exist. Here's my fear about reparations, and I understand the issue, and I'm on board the legislation that will study the issue. Here is my fear. The Congress gives African American community $20,000 check and say, thank you, that took care of slavery. We don't have to worry about anything more. I think that's wrong. I want to rebuild the distressed communities in America.
Thank you for that explanation. What would be your plan for Africa, Cuba, and Haiti? And then when it comes to Haiti and Cuba, there are different policies for asylum seekers from both nations. How would you fix that?
Well, we need comprehensive immigration reform clearly. And that deals not only with the Latino community, but with the African community as well. Sometimes we ignore that issue. My answer to your question is maybe radical, in that unlike the President of the United States, I happen to believe in democracy and in human rights. And I believe that we should reach out to try to end international conflict and not simply send billions of dollars in arms to countries all over the world. Instead of fueling the arms race, maybe we rebuild America, we rebuild our infrastructure, create millions of jobs right here.
But I'm going to ask you again, do you have a plan for Africa, Cuba, or Haiti?
Sure I do, and that is that we have normal diplomatic relations. I've been to Cuba, for example, on several occasions. I want to see trade opened up with the people of Cuba. I want to see the United States do everything that it can to address the very serious problems in Africa, and that again, instead of putting money into weapons of destruction, the United States should lead the world in putting money into schools, education, and environmental protection.
So did you get a chance before you came out on stage to watch what was happening on Capitol Hill? Did you see the Mueller testimony?
I have not seen it yet today, no.
What are your thoughts about the fact that Mueller feels that the president is not exonerated from obstruction of justice?
Well, that's kind of what he wrote in his report, and he is not exonerated. Look, we know for a fact that the president did everything that he could to obstruct the Mueller investigation. He told people not to testify. He told people to try to fire Mueller and other people in the investigation. So I'm not quite shocked about what he said.
Okay. Gentrification is a double-edged sword. However, what is your formula to bridge the chasm without hurting the disadvantaged?
Gentrification.
Yes, sir.
Look, we got a major crisis in this country in terms of affordable housing. All right? And it's not just that we have 500,000 people sleeping out on the streets today. You got millions of people who are spending 40, 50, 60% of their limited incomes on housing. And what we are going to tell the developers, you just cannot come in and build expensive condominiums and drive working class people who have lived in those communities their entire lives out of those communities. What we need to do is change the priorities of America. No more tax breaks for billionaires, no more but we're going to invest in health care, education, the needs of our children, the needs of our senior citizens. This is the richest country in the history of the world. 40 million people should not be living in poverty. 500,000 should not be homeless.
Senator Sanders, you talked about immigration earlier. How do you bring back humanity in this immigration process on the southern border?
Hard for me to talk when I'm sitting down. I'm sorry.
You want me to stand with you? I'll stand.
You can sit.
Okay, all right.
Look. Thanks, Jesse. The United States is about many things, but it is not about snatching babies from the arms of their mothers. It is not about putting children into cages. It is not about separating families. So we need, obviously, comprehensive immigration reform. We need a humane policy at the border, which understands that if a mother and a child travel 1,000 miles on foot to escape violence, they are not criminals. They have got to be treated humanely.
And in our last minute, would you bring back net neutrality since it was repealed a year ago by the Trump administration?
Yes. Look, let me just conclude, if I might, by saying this. We are the wealthiest country in the history of the world. We need to do what every other major country on earth does, guarantee health care to all people as a right. We need to make public colleges and universities tuition-free. We need to cancel student debt. We need to adequately fund HBCUs. We need an unprecedented grassroots movement that tells the 1% They cannot have it all. That this country belongs to all of us, not just wealthy campaign contributors.
Okay, so now you're in your closing.
Oh. Okay. Let me close in this way. This is the most dangerous period in the modern history of our country. And we have a president who thinks that he could win re-election by fomenting hatred and divisiveness. And our job is to do exactly the opposite. We need a presidential campaign which energizes and excites the American people, which brings young people out in unprecedented numbers. Now, I know the NAACP, your great organization, is working hard on that, and we're going to work with you. We win when the voter turnout is high. We will take on voter suppression from one end of this country to the other. I believe, and as president, I will implement a simple process. If you're 18 years of age in America, you are eligible to vote. End of discussion. This is not a moment to throw up our hands in despair. This is a moment to take on racism, sexism, homophobia, and this is a moment to go forward and create the kind of nation that we all know we can become. Thank you all very much, and thank you, NAACP, for all that you do.
Senator Bernie Sanders, candidate number 6. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Are you gaining information today for an informed decision at the ballot box? And next, candidate number 7, Amy Klobuchar. Hello, Senator. How are you doing? Thank you. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Hello, NAACP. It is always fun to follow Bernie Sanders. So let me tell you about me, because you may not know me as well. I am the daughter of the heartland. I grew up in Minnesota. I'm the granddaughter of an iron ore miner who worked 1,500 feet his whole life to send my dad to college. He saved money in a coffee can. My dad became a newspaper man. My mom, she grew up in Milwaukee, and she came to Minnesota, and she taught 2nd grade until she was 70 years old. And I stand before you today as the granddaughter of an iron ore miner, as a daughter of a teacher and a newspaper man, as the first woman elected to the United States Senate from the state of Minnesota, and a candidate for President of the United States. That is what this country is about, and something the NAACP has stood up for every single day of its existence. That no matter where you come from, no matter who you are, no matter the color of your skin, no matter where you worship, no matter who you love, that you should be able to succeed in the United States of America. That is what you stand for. And today, when we are seeing an unprecedented hearing in Washington, you may have seen me in the Kavanaugh hearings, when I fought for justice. Today, as we are seeing another hearing, we are reminded of something you have always stood for, and Donald Trump better be listening, that in America, as someone once said, the law is the king is not the law. So it is time for Donald Trump to stop the racism, to leave the White House, and we must have change in America, and I stand for economic opportunity. I stand for voting rights, something I have fought for dearly, and I stand for a better America for all of us. Thank you for having me.
Okay, it's time for questions, Senator Klobuchar. What is your black agenda?
Okay, so first of all, she asked what my black agenda is. First of all, I think we're not going to have a black agenda if we don't allow black people to vote, all right? When you think about what just happened in Georgia this last election where the Secretary of State who was running for governor withheld 58,000 voter registrations because they didn't have hyphens. If he wouldn't have been allowed to do that, Stacey Abrams would be governor of Georgia right now. So my agenda is to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. It is make sure, I actually carry the bill that Senator Sanders just mentioned to allow every single person in this country to register to vote when they turn 18 years old. And I would make sure we stop the voter suppression. The second part of it is economic opportunity. It's a simple idea that we know what's happened in this country, that there are not equal resources, that when we look at our public schools, April, we see a situation. My daughter was for years in a school that was nearly 90% free and reduced lunch. And I saw what happened to those kids in that school because they would come and they would be hungry. They'd be getting into the vending machines to try to get food to go home. We have a president right now that just yesterday tried to cut, as you know, food stamps. He announces that after giving trillions of dollars with the big weight of which is for the wealthy people. So my agenda is to make sure that we are investing in kids from early childhood on, investing in our public schools, making college much more affordable, and making sure that people can retire, which really hits the African American community hard.
So you just brought up the issue of food stamps. Whenever there is anything to be cut, it's always going for something, those subsidies for low-income Americans.
Yep.
Would you guarantee that that would not happen if you were President of the United States?
Yes.
Explain.
Well, I have been on the Agriculture Committee since I got to the Senate. I have a state that has a major metropolitan area.
And food
then
stamps come
also
through
rural.
agriculture.
And they come through agriculture. So I have a lot of experience. I've worked on a number of these farm bills and have stood up for that. You're not going to be able to have kids do well in school if they don't get good nutrition. And they're not going to be able to succeed if they're not able to learn.
Well, you've been criticized for not having top-tier staff that reflects the diversity of America. Is it a fair criticism, and explain why or why not?
Of the diversity of my staff?
Yes.
Oh, well,
top-tier staff.
Okay, well, we have, first of all, our staff actually, the diversity numbers are way above what my state is, and I've worked really hard on that. I go back to when I was county attorney. I was looking, I think 4 of the people that were some of my top people are now judges. I worked to promote them. I worked with them, recommended them for judges. My state director went on to be as African American, the city attorney in St. Paul, Minnesota. So I am proud of our record of diversity. And I think that you can't have a president that doesn't understand that their cabinet and their leadership and the judges they appoint must reflect the community and include major African American leadership.
You do not want direct payment for reparations. With that said, I'm going back to General Sherman's promise of 40 acres and a mule. Then President Abraham Lincoln supported it, but it was a promise that wasn't kept. Understanding that, what do you believe should happen?
Mm-hmm. Well, I am on Senator Booker and Sheila Jackson Lee's bill, which I think is a very important bill and has to be a priority for our country.
A study for the commission.
The commission for reparations. And as you know, that's a major bill out there. From there, I think you look at the recommendations from the commission and decide what to do. I think one of the most interesting things out there is what Representative Clyburn has been doing, which has been investing in impoverished and underserved communities and looking at that in a broader way. And that's another way you could ramp that up beyond what he has done.
What is the importance of an HBCU to you, and what would you do as president to ensure its longevity and its viability?
I didn't hear the first one.
What is the importance of an HBCU, a historically black college?
No, I know, I just didn't hear you.
Okay.
So I think that historically black colleges, and I was able to visit at Fisk just recently, historically black colleges are the centerpiece of African American education in this country, and we must keep them funded. I've met with their leadership numerous times. We must keep them strong, and I think it gets to the bigger issue of college in this country, and that is that it has become harder and harder for people to be able to go to college. That's why I support making sure the money goes where the money should be, and that is with the people that need it the most. I favor doubling the Pell Grants. I favor increasing the eligibility for those Pell Grants, making community college free, and then making it easier for people to pay back their loans.
On issues of policing, I want to bring up a recent case, Eric Garner. What are your thoughts about what happened? Should the police officer have been charged in that case, in that choking death?
That is for the justice system to decide, and I know it went through a number of attorney generals, but I thought that what happened there, if you could just let me answer, I thought it was an outrageous situation. I watched that video, and it just tears your heart out to see what happened. I think in a broader sense that we have to make a decision on how we're going to deal with a criminal justice system that has very strong problems with racism. We have to admit that this criminal justice system is racist and go from there. What do I think we need to do? Number one, make sure body cameras are the law. Number two, have a diverse police force. Number three, don't just rely on investigations to be done by internal prosecutors in the office that handles the case, that people should be looking at the cases. Police investigations should come from the outside. Number four, again, don't always use the grand jury system. Make the prosecutor make the decisions herself.
Senator Klobuchar, what is the biggest misconception about you that people should take in, or what do you want to say?
I think the biggest misconception of me may be because I'm someone that gets things done in Washington. I've passed over 100 bills where I've been the lead Democrat, that somehow means that you're not bold enough. And I think my ideas are bold. For decades, we've tried to take on the pharmaceutical companies to bring down the cost of prescription drugs, and that has failed. We have tried to do things when it comes to making affordable college. It's failed. I think we need someone bold that is going to continue on this march, work side by side with the NAACP. You are the welders that have shortened that arc of justice, and that is what we must do to beat Donald Trump.
And time to close.
Okay, thank you. Well, I want to thank all of you, and I start with what happened the day of that inauguration, that dark day. And you look at what happened the next day, millions of people marched across this country, right? They didn't just put their blanket over their heads and say what went wrong, they marched. Then you go to the next day when 6,000 women signed up to run for office. This is the march that we are on. And then you go to day 10, where at that airports all over the country, after the president put out that mean-spirited Muslim ban, right? What happened? People spontaneously showed up at airports all across this country, and they marched and they objected. You go through to the summer when they tried to repeal Obamacare, right? Tried to take away people's right to protect themselves from getting thrown off their insurance for pre-existing conditions. What happened? The Democrats united. We were joined by 3 Republicans, and we won. That is because we are on a march to justice. You go into that fall when we elected people in races in Virginia and New Jersey, when in the state of Alabama, where no one ever thought it possible, in a victory against racism, we stood up for dignity, and Doug Jones won that seat in the Senate in the state of Alabama. That's what happened because of all of you. You go and see those kids marching after Parkland. They didn't just march, they voted, which brings us to the midterm, where we elected the most diverse group of candidates we have ever had. Literally 50 years after the first African-American woman was elected to Congress, we elected 20 to the House of Representatives. You did that, and that is the march that we were on that is going to take us to 2020. Thank you very much for having me today. Thank you for your good work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Senator Amy Klobuchar, candidate number 7. We're rolling through this. All right, we've got candidate number 8. Candidate number 8, Vice President Joe Biden. Here he is. Hello, Mr. Vice President. How are you doing? Good to see you.
Thanks for having me again.
You too.
Good to be home.
Good to be home. Okay, you've got 2 minutes. You can sit or you can stand. You can do whatever you want to do. Well, within reason, but you can. No. Oh, wow.
Am I supposed to say something right now? Folks,
2 minutes.
Look.
151.
Oh, 151. Oh, time's running out. Hey, folks, look, it's good to be back. I've had the chance to be with you all my whole career. You got me started. Hey, Jess, how are you? Got me started back in Delaware. I'm a lifetime member. I got involved early on. When I got back from law school, my city was in flames because of Dr. King being assassinated. I became a public defender. I'd been working with the NAACP then and now. And, there's an old expression, y'all brought me to the dance. And I'm still dancing with you. The fact of the matter is that there's a lot at stake. We're really in a battle for the soul of the country right now. And we have a president who's done everything to divide us, to split us apart. And this is not who we are as a nation. We've never fully lived up to the notion, we the people, or we hold these truths self-evident, but we've never abandoned them before. And this president has abandoned them. And the single most important thing we have to do for all I want to do, from criminal justice reform to education to a whole range of issues from global warming on, is nothing happens unless we defeat Donald Trump, flat out. That's number one. Number two, it seems to me that we also want to make sure that, we're in a position where we have there's no one solution to any of the problems that exist in the systemic racism that is here. I did a lot of work here in Detroit, 26 seconds left. The president put me in charge of getting Detroit back on its feet. I was able to cherry pick the best administration. We came in and we dealt with the problems. And one of the things we found out is that there's nothing the community cannot do given half a chance. And that's what this is all about. I'm happy to answer your questions, and I'll get off of here.
Come on, Mr. Vice President. Come on. Yes, sir, I would like you here.
All right.
Former Vice President Biden, the last time I saw you was 2017. We received our honorary doctorates together at Morgan State University. Remember that?
Right.
That's right.
I got to be the speaker at Morgan.
You got to be the speaker. And with that, what is the importance to you of HBCUs? And what would you do if you are made president of the United States?
I would fund HBCUs.
Look, how would you fund them?
Everybody has to understand, this is the only audience that understands it, but I've been deeply involved with HBCUs from the very beginning of my career. Delaware State University, the best HBCU in the country.
You're going to get in trouble now.
I know that, I know.
You're going to get in real trouble.
All kidding aside, that's where I got started. I wouldn't have been elected president of the United States, I wouldn't have been elected senator. And I won't get elected president without them either, but I wouldn't get elected senator because I got engaged early on in the civil rights movement in my state. No great shakes, but I'd start off in the black churches, and we'd go from there to desegregate movie theaters. I was no great leader. I was just a kid who worked in the East Side, and then in college got a lot of support from Delaware State University. And so I think, remember, they were put in place because of systemic racism. That's why they're there. And I think we have an obligation. They're really in tough economic times right now. And that's why the president and I, Obama and I, when we were in office, we spent a lot of time and money in bringing programs to HBCUs. I think we should be spending $500 million over time to do with them just what we're doing with community colleges. But I'll get to that if you want me to go into any detail.
Well, you're on the clock. We got a lot more questions for you. So you launched your new criminal justice plan.
Yep.
Can you explain your evolution since the 1994 crime bill?
Well, by the way, let's get straight with what the 1994 crime bill was. 1994 crime bill, we had a gigantic epidemic in America of violence, particularly in African-American communities. Now, Jesse and I disagreed a little bit in this, but in my community, the notion was overwhelmingly supported. It was supported by the Black Caucus in the United States Senate, by and large.
Some members.
The majority supported it. The majority supported it, and black mayors supported it. But here's the deal. What happened is we lost the election 2 years later. We're unable to, every major initiative needs to be reformed. And we have now a systemic problem and too many African Americans in jail right now. So I think we should shift the whole focus from what we're doing in terms of incarceration to rehabilitation. I think we should be in a situation where anybody convicted of a drug crime, in fact, goes before the drug courts that I set up. We should fund it $400 million a year. I don't think anybody should go to jail because of a drug crime. I don't think, unless they're a major seller or dealer. The fact of the matter is, I also think we should be having in prisons, education programs in prison. No, I really mean it, because look, the whole idea is when we let somebody out of prison, we want them to be engaged in the community. Don't just give them 25 bucks and a bus ticket. They should be entitled to housing, they should be entitled to Pell Grants, they should be every single thing, including restoring their right to vote. It's about getting them back engaged in the community. There's much more, but...
Yeah, we only have a little bit of time. All right. Is your time in the Obama administration an asset or a crutch as you seek to run on your own as President of the United States?
It's not a crutch. You ask President Obama. I didn't need any crutch, although, as Trump says, he dragged me off the scrap heap, as Trump says it. But look, the fact of the matter is, this is not a continuation of our administration. What it is there's new problems. There's new problems we face today that were different than the ones we faced at the time. But the fact of the matter is, he's a close friend. I'm very proud to have served with him. And I might add, if he thought it was good enough for me they did a significant background check on me for months with 10 people. I doubt whether he would have picked me if this accusations about my being wrong on civil rights was correct.
If elected president, you would have to correct the atrocities of the current immigration process as it pertains to the southern border. How would you handle the course corrections?
Real quickly, Dreamers would automatically be American citizens. They're already American citizens, number one. Number two, we need rational border security. We have a right to secure our border. We should do that with modern technology. We have not building walls and doing what we're doing now. Thirdly, I would surge to the border significant number of additional judges for asylum. I would change the president's asylum rule. I would lift the Muslim ban. I would do a whole range of things. But here's the deal. We have 11 million undocumented people in the United States of America. I provide a path to citizenship. So on day one when I get elected, if I'm elected, if you choose to elect me, on day one, I will introduce a major reform of the entire immigration system because that's what's made us who we are. That's who we are.
In 139, you know this is 400 years since the first slaves were brought to this nation from Africa. What would be your Africa policy? And I want you to talk about the disparity between Haiti and Cuba. How would you fix that when it comes to asylum seekers from both nations?
I would provide asylum from both seekers. When we were in office, you remember what we did was a major initiative in African countries. The point is, people don't understand, it is a burgeoning continent. It provides for an incredible opportunity for the world and for the people in those communities. That's why I visit almost every African country. And the point is, it's not a charity case. It's about growing with them. We should be there. China's in there full bore. The Russians are in there full bore. We should be engaged. And that's why I got so deeply involved in the anti-apartheid movement when Reagan was president. We have to demonstrate who we are as a nation. And that's why Barack focused on African countries in order to bring not just them along, but us along with them. Great economic opportunity for both of us.
Mr. Vice President, but what about Haiti and Cuba, just once again?
Haiti and Cuba, I would provide for the access to the United States of America for those people who are seeking refuge, as asylum.
So it would be no different?
No, I find no difference.
All right, well, you've got time for your closing.
I know it, Wayne, I know.
Oh, okay. Folks, look.
He wants to stay.
I do want to stay. I'm used to coming here a long time. Folks, look. We have an opportunity to change the landscape of what's going on in America. But the first thing we have to do, state the obvious, is get rid of Donald Trump. But the second thing is we have to understand that this is about whether the African-American community does well depends on how well America does. And I'm not being solicitous. I'm being deadly earnest. Deadly earnest. What we have to do is make sure that we challenge. That's why I triple funding for Title I schools. There's not a thing a kid in an African-American community can't learn that a white kid in in a rich community can't learn. We should challenge people. That's why we should have free school, 3, 4, and 5 years old, everybody. We know the numbers. If people from poor communities go to school 3, 4, and 5, they have more than a 50% chance of graduating from high school, staying out of trouble, being engaged in profitable undertakings. We should make community college free. We should be in and by the way, that's only $6 billion to get every single solitary person qualified for community college, cutting in half the cost of college. We should be supporting HBCUs because they are the rock bed of where people, in fact, get started here. And the other thing is, folks, on the environment. If you look at the environment, the people who are killed by the environment are people in poor communities, like in my city, where the smokestacks are dropping on them, where they're flooding on them. We are not paying nearly as much attention. And all the way back to 1986, you can check Real Politics, you know, the fact check. I introduced the first initiative that made a difference in terms of climate change. We must focus on here and up the road in Flint. We should be replacing all those pipes. What is the matter with us? South Carolina, we have the capacity to do all of this. I got 6 seconds left. Just let me say, I love you. Look me over. I need your help. Thank you.
Vice President Joe Biden, former Vice President Joe Biden. Information is power. This is how you fight. All right, so all right, what's the slogan? When we fight, we win. Candidate number 8, former Vice President Joe Biden. Candidate number 9, Kamala Harris. Hello, Senator. How are you, Senator?
Okay, greetings. Good morning, NAACP. Good morning. So, I first just want to thank everyone here for the leadership that you provide every day. I have only 2 minutes, so I just want to say this. We all stand on broad shoulders of those who came before us and fought a good fight. And the way that I think about this moment in time is that they passed us a baton in this relay race. And the question will be, what do we do with the moment that we have it? And what I know is that the folks in this room are leading on all of those things that we know we must fight for. Education, housing, economic wealth, and security. And I will tell you that as President of the United States, those will, as they have always been, be my priorities. I know that this is an inflection moment in the history of our country. It is a moment in time where we are being required to look in a mirror and ask a question, that question being, who are we? And what we know, NAACP, is we are better than this. And so this is a moment in time where we must fight for the best of who we are, and fight we will. And this is not a new fight for us. We are up to this fight. We know how to fight the good fight when it's about fighting for equality and fairness and justice. We know this fight. And I come from a family of fighters. My parents were active in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. My sister and I joke we grew up surrounded by a bunch of adults who spent full time marching and shouting about this thing called justice. And it is why Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston and Constance Baker Motley and all of those broad shoulders upon whom we stand fought that good fight, and so now it is ours with the baton that we have. And I will tell you, I am prepared to fight for the America we believe in. We have always been deep of faith, and we have always believed in what can be unburdened by what has been. That is the fight before us, and we will win.
All right, Senator, come on, let's take some questions. All right, so did you watch TV this morning by any chance?
I did not. I've been on a plane flying here.
All right, so I'm going to ask.
But I heard about it, but
so
I haven't seen it.
What do you think of what Mueller said today?
Well, from what I gather, he said everything that he said in that report. And it is that there is no exoneration. He said what that report reads and says, which is that there are 10 clear, separate incidents of obstruction of justice, and that the only reason there was not an indictment returned is because of a memo in the United States Department of Justice that says a sitting president cannot be indicted. So we know what we knew then. The problem, April, where we are, and I believe the need, therefore, for Mueller to testify today, was that the intervening fact between that investigation and the report was the current Attorney General of the United States misleading the American people. And so that needed to be cleared up. But I will tell you, having run the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, which was the California Department of Justice, I am very clear that there are outlined incidents of obstruction of justice, and no matter what this current Attorney General and the President of the United States try to say, the American people are smart enough to know what is and what is not truth.
All right. So, as you mentioned, your job as prosecutor. Let's go back to that time. I want to ask you about a few high-profile cases and how you would have handled them if elected president of the United States. Would you have charged the officer accused of the choking death of Eric Garner, yes or no?
Well, you know, I was just actually with Eric Garner's mother yesterday. And I will tell you that we spent a great deal of time together. First of all, part of what is wrong with this, what happened, and also the way that this happens every day in America, is we have to honor the grief of a mother and give her the dignity she deserves. The second problem with that case is that, and everyone I think knows this, the United States Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division made a recommendation that that case be charged. But the Attorney General...
During the Obama years.
And the Attorney General, the current Attorney General, instead went to the Eastern District of New York and bypassed the recommendation of the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice. Under my administration, the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice will have priority in terms of weighing in on what these cases should be. Furthermore, in a Harris administration, we will require independent investigations of these cases to ensure that there is justice, unimpeded by bias, unimpeded by prior relationships.
Okay. I'm going to ask you another legal issue. As president, how would you handle the ASAP Rocky case in Sweden? How will you use your power to make sure misuse of power doesn't happen in cases like this, and that this case would stay in the State Department and not go to the White House?
Listen, there is no question that this White House has been playing politics with his with his role of leadership, and it has to end. This president, I just want to back up for a second. So, you know, I have fought predators. I fought the 5 big banks of the United States when they were preying on the homeowners of the United States in pushing those loans and then rubber stamping foreclosures, which particularly hurt black families in America. I took on those banks. I have taken on the predators that have been the pharmaceutical companies and the big oil companies that have preyed on consumers, preyed on seniors. And I'm going to tell you something. We have a predator living in the White House. And the thing you got to know is that it is the nature of predators. It is their instinct and their nature to prey on those they perceive to be vulnerable, to prey on those they perceive to be weak, to prey on those who are in need of help, often desperate for help. And the other thing about predators, they're cowards. They're cowards. And I am prepared, April, to prosecute the case against 4 more years of Donald Trump. And there is a rap sheet. And when you look at the fact that this president said he was going to come in and help working families, but passed a tax bill benefiting the top 1% and the biggest corporations of America. You talk about how he said he was going to come in and help working families and with health care, but then has tried with everything he had to get rid of Obamacare. You look at the fact that this is a president who has pushed policies that has been about putting babies in cages at the border in the name of border security, when in fact what it is a human rights abuse being committed by the United States government. We have got to take this case on against Donald Trump and expose it for what it is.
So you're saying this is another piece on the rap sheet of Donald Trump, this misuse of power in the ASAP Rocky case?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Say it loud.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted the folks to hear.
And I'm black and I'm proud. She said, say it loud.
Wait a minute, say that again. I didn't hear you. What did you say?
Say it loud. I'm black and I'm proud.
All right, now. All right, here we go. Here we go. Okay. How does your new criminal justice plan answer what some call the failed war on drugs with collateral consequences?
So on a number of levels. First of all, we just actually, with Jerry Nadler, who is the head of the Judiciary Committee in the House in the United States Congress, we just rolled out what I intend to do that is not only about decriminalizing and legalizing marijuana, but also what we need to do to ensure that this industry, because check this out, the legalization of marijuana, it has happened in my state of California, a state of 40 million people. It's happened in Colorado, many other places. People are making a lot of money right now. People are making a lot of money off of this new industry. And here's the irony and what is wrong about it. Those young men and women who for years were selling it on the streets and are now felons for life have been excluded from this industry, and now people are making a lot of money doing the exact same thing.
1:30 to
so
close.
Part of what I am proposing,
1:30.
so part of what I'm proposing is that they be first in line to get those jobs, that their convictions not prevent them from having access to an industry where they can support themselves and their families. It's only right.
Senator, 1:10 to close. Our time is gone.
Well, there's so much to talk about. I invite everyone to look at our website, www.kamalaharris.org, because we have a number of proposals. Part of what I'm prepared to do also is deal with the issue of home ownership and closing the racial wealth gap in the United States. And I want to talk specifically about this because it is long overdue. We know there is a history from back when World War II, when people were coming back from war and the United States government said, we're going to help build a new middle class, and gave all of these promotions and money to these returning veterans, but black veterans were excluded from that. You look at the history of redlining, where black folks here in Detroit were excluded from home ownership, which is one of the greatest sources of wealth for any family in America. And then you look at the foreclosure crisis that disproportionately impacted black families. So what I'm prepared to do is put $100 billion of federal money into focusing on families living in red-lined districts, to focus on families living in federally subsidized housing, to help with down payments for home ownership, and also to change the credit history process so that when you pay your phone bill on time, when you pay your utility bill on time, when you pay your rent on time, that will also be measured as an evidence of financial responsibility.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, NAACP.
Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you so much.
I had more to say.
Senator Kamala Harris, candidate number 9. And we're down to our final candidate. Whew. Do you feel empowered? Do you know more than what you knew before? Do you think this will help you make a decision at the polls? All right. All right. And our last and final candidate, candidate number 10. A Republican who's going up against President Donald Trump. Bill Weld. Let's welcome Bill Weld, candidate number 10. Thank you. Hello, sir. I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you. You have 2 minutes, Governor, for an opening statement.
Well, still good morning, everybody. My name is Bill Weld, and I'm already running against Donald Trump in the Republican primaries. So let's get one thing out of the way right at the beginning. Donald Trump is a raging racist, okay? He's a complete and thoroughgoing racist. And he made that choice as a choice a long time ago when he was engaged in the housing business in New York with his father. And he famously said, "We have ways of keeping people like them out of our projects," referring, of course, to people of color. He was convicted of that. And that apple didn't fall far from the tree. So he made that choice. Now the Republican Party in Washington, the National Republican Party, has a choice. And a lot of them like to think that it's a political choice. But it's not a political choice. It's a moral choice. And unless the Republican Party in Washington expressly rejects the racism of Donald Trump, they're going to come to be universally viewed as the party of racism in America. I don't propose to stand idly by and let that happen, and so I look forward to working closely with the NAACP as president on issues near and dear to me, such as education opportunity in the inner cities, school choice, charter schools, equalizing funding across school districts so the inner city minority districts don't get the short end of the stick as historically they have, on criminal justice reform, where a black person is 4 times as likely to get arrested for possessory marijuana as a white, 4 times as likely to get a jail sentence. The jail sentence is likely to be 4 times as long as for a white person. That's a 64-to-1 disparity. We're going to work on that. Thank you.
It's time for questions. Governor Weld, I'm asking you like I asked everyone else, particularly as you are in the president's party. Did you watch Mueller this morning talking about the president is not exonerated from obstruction of justice, and what are your thoughts?
Well, I almost didn't need to watch Bob this morning. Bob was my deputy in the Justice Department. I've known him forever. I read every word of the Mueller report. I was one of more than 1,000 former federal prosecutors who signed a document saying, yeah, the 10 examples of obstruction that Mueller cites, they make out the elements of the offense of obstruction of justice under 18 U.S. Code Section 1512. So that's 1,000 prosecutors, career people by and large. Mueller's report paints the most vivid picture of a scofflaw and a one-man crime wave as I've ever seen. He orders people to destroy documents, to lie. They say, I can't do that. That would be a lie. He says, what's your point? The man is a moral leper. He has no clue, no compass.
So should Donald Trump be impeached?
I think the House should start impeachment inquiry. That doesn't mean you take a vote tomorrow. I worked on the Nixon impeachment, and the House was 8 to 10 months, and that was a much less complex investigation than would be required for Mr. Trump. What people don't understand is if the president were impeached in the House, there was an investigation for 8 or 10 months, let's say they vote to send it over to the Senate doesn't take a vote the next day. The House appoints 8 people to go manage the prosecution in the Senate, and that's another 6 months. By the time that was concluded, the election would be over. So the fear of Donald Trump getting acquitted by a totally partisan vote in September of 2020 and saying exonerated again, that's a baseless fear.
All right, sir. So issues of equality are being folded into the abortion debate. Where do you stand on the Medicaid issue and abortion?
Well, I've been pro-choice since the first day I was in politics on the abortion issue. I'll get to this later, but I intend, as part of my coalition I hope to build, to appeal to all women to vote for me in the primary against Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump is associated with the atrocious legislation recently coming out of Alabama and Georgia, which treats women as carriers, as chattel. It's just unthinkable. And Mr. Trump and the Republican National Party seem to be content to sit still for that. And it's unconscionable. Medicaid was the other?
Yes, how Medicaid and abortion are now playing out in this weight challenge.
Yeah, I couldn't vote for the Hyde Amendment. I think you got to have fairness, so all women have equal access to reproductive freedom.
Okay. Global warming impacts us all, particularly in minority America. Just look at Katrina. Beyond rejoining the Paris Accord, how would you position the U.S. as a global leader in combating climate change?
I think climate change is a major issue. Mr. Trump, as you know, has a one-word platform for it, hoax. If nothing is done to lower the CO2 levels by 2030 or 2050, the polar ice cap will melt, all mountain glaciers around the world will melt. We'll have repetitions of Katrina in this country, which impact negatively upon communities of color disproportionately. You asked earlier, April, about Haiti. The problem in Haiti, the reason so many people were killed in the earthquake down there was construction. So in addition to humanitarian aid, that's the island of Hispaniola. It's right on the line for earthquakes. We need to go down there and help Haiti rebuild, not just humanitarian aid.
All right, so you want to pull in Haiti. How much would it cost? What does your plan cost to help Haiti? Haiti is in need. It's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere.
I know that, but to put Port-au-Prince back on its feet would be a drop in the bucket.
But not just Port-au-Prince.
No, I understand, but a drop in the bucket for what FEMA spends every year. I often like to say that to govern is to choose, and it's a matter of priorities. And, I think when you have a humanitarian situation like that, that's going to happen again, crying out for assistance, I would pull the lever and say, that's my priority. That's all you have to do as President of the United States.
All right. So you're talking about the infrastructure of Haiti helping the people, but what about asylum? Cuba versus Haiti. Cuba asylum seekers come to the U.S., Haitian asylum seekers are sent back home because of the color of their skin.
That's ludicrous. You have to equalize that. I do think we should be kind to Cuba. Matter of fact, I would go back to the Obama policy and open that up. I think tourism and economic cooperation is the way to go there, and then you wouldn't have so many asylum seekers.
All right, okay. Why does Africa matter to the United States, and what would be your Africa policy?
Africa, where I've spent a good deal of time over the last 10 years, is the continent of the future, if you will. Maybe this is the Pacific century. Africa is the continent of the future. There are many misunderstandings about Africa. People think it's all dirt poor. There are a lot of African countries with compound annual growth rates of 10, 12, 16%. People don't know that. People like Donald Trump, who doesn't know anything about anything, refer to, and I'm going to use a French word that Donald Trump used, not me, refer to, quote, a bunch of shithole countries, close quote, over there. That's Donald Trump. And Africa is a spectacular...
That's not a French word.
Oh, I thought it was. Sorry. But, his policy is upside down, inside out. I love, I've been in a lot of countries there, and some are very rewarding. South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. I was over there and met with Trevor Manuel. I was great friends with Thabo Mbeki, who gave me the South Africa tie. Others are more difficult, Democratic Republic of Congo. But, it breaks your heart. And one thing I was engaged in over there is teaching people out in the country to do subsistence farming instead of slash and burn, because subsistence can go year after year. And the people there never wanted to do that because it meant they could be found by the gangs that were going to come to kill them.
We got 17 seconds for Q&A. Really fast. You've heard me ask about reparations. What are your thoughts? That's a big issue right now.
Reparations for past?
Yeah, for the past atrocity of slavery.
Well,
descendants of...
I would put a thumb pretty hard on the income inequality scale, and I think a lot has to be done there. I think a lot has to be done criminal justice for the, Senator Booker has a plan to get 17,000 people out of prison from the marijuana days. I'd go with that. That's where I'd go first.
Thank you, sir. It has been a pleasure. Our time is down. You can close.
Well, like I say, I'm Bill Weld, and I'm running against Donald Trump in the primaries. And so my message to the people to whom I'm going to be speaking, and by the way, I'm not going to try to convert the Republican National Party or the Republican state committees. They're already lockstep with Trump. They are his organization. But I'm speaking to a different coalition. I'm speaking to millennials who will get murdered by the debt, murdered by climate change. I'm speaking to women everywhere. I think that we need to broaden the electorate of people who will vote in that primary. And I'm saying to people, you can vote against Donald Trump twice. If you come in and vote in the Republican Party, that vote, for me, that vote's coming right out of Donald Trump's hide, and it's going to weaken him. There have been 5 presidents in modern times who have run for re-election and been challenged within their own party in a primary. All 5 of them lost. The other 5 times there was no primary, those presidents won. But Truman, Johnson, Ford, Carter, and George Bush, 41, all lost because of a primary. And George Bush, 41, lost when Pat Buchanan got only 37% of the vote in the New Hampshire primary, which I plan to win. So if everybody gets together and votes to the extent you can, see your way clear, in the Republican Party, we can send a strong 2-word message to Donald J. Trump as he packs his golf clubs, and that is, you're fired!
Governor Weld, thank you so much. Thank you so much. There you have it. 10 presidential candidates. The choice is yours. Go to the polls. What does the NAACP say? The slogan for this convention: when you fight, you win. When you fight. So the bottom line is, this is one of the tools that you have in the toolbox. You're going to the polls armed. You're going to the polls armed. With that, thank you so much. April Ryan, over and out.